Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Understanding Emotions. I thought today we will take a step back and ponder on the why of developing emotional intelligence. Why put in the time to cultivate emotional intelligence? What's the payoff and what is the problem in the first place? To start off this investigation, I would like to invoke a historical sense of where we are at. We are living in the best times in history. Name any metric you can think of, and you will see an undeniable sense of progress in the last 100 or a few hundred years. Let's take lifespan, for example. The average life expectancy of a human just 200 years ago, your great-grandfather's generation, was merely 31 years. Today, it is 72 years. Think about it. There were like world wars and stuff going around just in the last century. Take poverty as another example. Adjusting for inflation, the share of humanity living on less than $2 a day was 85% in 1800s and about 55% in 1850. Today it is less than 9%. But statistics don't speak as well as looking around for ourselves. Take your own story. If you're listening to this, chances are you have a great internet connection, a mobile phone, which also means that you have access to food, shelter, and water. In fact, you wouldn't even have to think about the latter three. Even today, many of these things are not available to a large portion of humanity. So the point I'm making is that materially speaking, we are living a life of abundance. But here is the question. Does our day-to-day experience reflect this massive improvement in health, wealth, and safety? Think about yourself. Do you feel completely satisfied and at ease with yourself on a daily basis, even though you're living in the best times in history? Do you have perfect self-esteem? I am willing to bet that the answer is no. In fact, it is quite likely that most of your time is spent lost in obsessive self-critical talk. Now, I'm not suggesting that there is no link between material abundance and personal well-being. There almost certainly is. People in wealthier countries report greater happiness, for example. But what I'm suggesting is that the path toward emotional well-being is not simply the path of material accumulation. Emotional well-being does not come as a byproduct of material abundance. Some amount of material wealth might be necessary to even have the bandwidth to focus on emotional flourishing. But once we meet that baseline, the emotional well-being game is played on a completely different ballpark. In this sense, it might be the first time in history that such a large portion of humanity is safe, healthy, and that it can even focus on emotional flourishing. Ignoring our mental well-being also has its consequences. Many of the problems that we face today have their roots in the mind and in emotions. Take tribalism, for example. Our emotions have evolved in a way that we care more about our tribe than others. Now, what happens when we take this tribal brain and put it in a nationalized and globalized world? Increasing polarization, communal violence, racial hatred are all consequences. If we neglect emotional intelligence, then we will always have the capacity to create problems for each other, no matter how many laws and policies are made. Look, our subjective experiences determine the quality of our lives. Even material wealth matters as long as it improves our subjective experiences. I believe emotional intelligence is precisely the skill of creating and sustaining good subjective experiences and of avoiding unnecessarily bad ones. Of course, good and bad don't easily translate into pleasant and unpleasant, and a large part of emotional intelligence is figuring out what's good and bad. But as for the why, why cultivate emotional intelligence? It is because the currency of a good life is the experience of that life. There are some other practical reasons for developing emotional intelligence. We live in an attention economy. Big data companies like Google and Facebook have their entire business models centered around selling your attention to advertisers and offering you services in return. With this emphasis on attention, there is now market incentive for companies to capture your attention and keep them for long. Now, I'm not against social media or Google searching, but I do believe that we should be able to give our attention to them whenever we want, rather than letting our attention just being yanked around. And this is where emotional intelligence comes as a handy skill to have. An emotionally intelligent person would have the skills to redirect attention wherever they want it to be in any given moment. In addition, more and more jobs are increasingly being automated. As a result, the ability to learn new skills and reinvent one's identity will be paramount in the years to come. It is highly unlikely that one can stay relevant with a single skill set acquired in school or college, and hence emotional intelligence becomes very important. For emotional intelligence and the ability to learn new things are deeply connected. For more of a discussion on this connection, check out my episode on humility and learning. It's episode 4. But yeah, these are the reasons why I think emotional intelligence is the need of the hour. The list is by no means exhaustive, but the most important reason is the fact that there is no escaping emotions in life. And given that, relating to emotions well is key to a good life. We have a full-time job of managing our emotions, and we pay no attention in honing our skills to do that job. Perhaps in history, we were so busy feeding ourselves and in surviving each other's attacks that we had no time to focus on emotions. But now we do. And so emotional well-being should be the next big thing that we all focus on. Okay, welcome to the part of the show wherein we do some practical exercises. Today I suggest you reflect on your own reasons why you would want to cultivate emotional intelligence. Perhaps because you wish to never be anxious in a social meetup again, or perhaps because there is childhood trauma that's limiting your life. Just think about why it's worth to have a flourishing emotional life. Such a reflection is extremely powerful because it charges us up to put in more effort. Alright, thank you very much for listening to this episode. For today's announcements, we've had listeners from a couple of more countries now, taking the count to more than 15. Welcome to all those tuning in for the first time. This podcast is also now available on Spotify. Please use the link in the show notes to get to our Spotify page. And always, thanks very much for tuning in. I must reiterate that it means a lot to hear from you. It gives me the reassurance that I'm not speaking in the void, and thus keeps me going. So please keep your feedbacks, comments, and suggestions coming. If you think this show is of value to you, and maybe of value to others, please share this podcast. While I think I am far from perfect in presenting this material, I believe simply starting this conversation of emotional intelligence will be of value to many people. So please do share this podcast with whoever you think will benefit. Thank you once again, and see you next week.